But to get things started for today, we've got an interesting question that's come up since the weekend, and I'm very keen to hear you lads' thoughts on this one overall. So the question is, following Greg Taylor's match winner on Saturday, is there a lesson there that at times we as fans should show more patience with our players and give them a proper chance to succeed? I'll come to you first, Paddy.
I think it just depends on, the early signs of what you've seen from a player. There's a reason we are sitting in the stands watching the game and we're not in the dugouts. I take that fully into consideration, but I just think that there's a lot of players you can kind of see, right, you're playing at the peak, you're playing at the height of what you can offer as a team, or they're nowhere near it. And obviously we look at someone like Greg Taylor, who, myself included, a year ago I was saying, no, he's not good enough, but he's bought into the philosophy that Ange has set out. And for me, probably the only one out of all of our Champions League games this season, it gets pass marks. I've seen a lot, obviously, about other players, like, we could maybe give a bit of time off, but like a bit of time to, and to see whether or not they hit the same levels as what Taylor has. My big concern with that is that this is a team that, albeit we created chances in Europe, we've just not had the killer edge, and that's what we need to fix. So we need to make sure that we're looking at getting those players in that are correct for that. Yeah,
maybe we should stick Taylor up front. The guy's clearly got an eye for goal.
Aye.
As we've seen at the weekend. James, Greg Taylor signed for Celtic on the 2nd of September 2019. So 3 years and a bit, and it's only now that he seems to have been fully accepted by the fans.
Yeah, that's fair. First season wouldn't really count. Last season it was patchy, but I would take into account that he was learning a whole new way to play his position. I was talking to a couple of guys before the game on Sunday, and I was saying the fullbacks are almost getting to an interchangeable position where you can have Ralston or Juranovic, you can have Taylor or Bernabe. That's maybe Bernabe showed me wrong there. But my point on my comment on the two of them was that Taylor's better at defending and inverting, and Bernabe's better at going past a man and crossing. Taylor came on, defended, inverted, shored up at the back and got his goal. So what a journey he's been on to learn his trade. And yeah, I take the point that, if you'd asked me last season, early doors last season, do you want to buy a new left back and drop Taylor? I'd have said aye. I would have. Just taking a bit on it is that there's two things. Everyone loves to see Celtic players coming in and developing. There's no fan that doesn't like to see that. But the pressure we're under as a club to win every game, progress in Europe, it's double-edged that. You haven't got a lot of time to have bad games, but as long as you see a player progressing, I think generally they're supported.
Yeah, I mean, Celtic are quite unique, I would say, in the bigger picture, in the global game, in terms of, as you say, James, Celtic drawn is a disaster. It's something that's just not accepted, regardless of what competition you're in. Whereas across most other clubs, worldwide, you get that flexibility to bring guys in, and it's why I suppose guys like Taylor maybe came through at Kilmarnock, and other guys have found success elsewhere before making the move. Matt, obviously you're a huge fan and you've never hidden your admiration of Greg Taylor, but it is fair to say, and the point I made to James is, it's taken him 2 to 3 years to become an overnight success, if you want to look at it like that way. Those that can see the video can see that I'm doing the Neil Lennon air quotes there, but it's not been a quick fix. I mean, do we need to give every player 2 or 3 years?
Not necessarily. I would reference James's point there around we as a club are very demanding. The supporters are very demanding. That's what drives standards. If we felt it was okay to draw 6-7 games in a season, then the players would react accordingly and probably provide you with that. We demand that the team wins every game. And when the title races are tight, a draw is effectively like a defeat because it's 3 points for a win. So it's double-edged, as James says. It's part of the fabric of the club that we demand so much for the players. In relation to Taylor, I felt that Taylor he had a hard act to follow in Kieran Tierney. He was a Rangers fan, so those.
Do you think that's really a factor? Kenny Dalglish, Dan Mulgrew, over the years, I just don't think it's a factor.
It's a factor when you've not come in at the level of the player you've meant to be replacing. I think it's a factor when you come in. It's not just one factor though. I think it's a whole combination of things. He wasn't the finished article when we bought him. Normally you would expect if somebody like Kieran Tierney, who's come through and progressed and just goes straight into goes into the first team and develops over what was a hugely successful period for the club, your hope as a fan would be it's going to be plug and play, and then you just bring somebody in. But it wasn't helped with Taylor either. Taylor was brought in and Bolingoli was also brought in as well. It just neither of them really seemed to solve the problem. And Bolingoli himself became a wee bit of a pet of the certain element of the Celtic fans that they really liked him. And Taylor was then sort of ostracised as a result of that. So I think there was many factors that involved Taylor not really being rated. But why is Greg Taylor been almost universally accepted by Celtic fans? He's playing well consistently. The only way to deal with any perceived stick that you're getting for the fans is just to give your best and play at a really high level with the help of a coach coming in that understands the position, because Ange himself was a fullback once more from his fullbacks. I think that's why you've seen such an excellent development.
Yeah, I would say, sorry to interject, Mark, just last season, even when he wasn't quite at the heights he's at this season, he never had, and he gave 100% every single game, much in the line of Ralston, that real commitment. So I think that, gives a bit of patience for the fans. You can see he's doing his very best. Sometimes you maybe go, he's doing his very best and it's maybe not quite enough, but he's got there.
Paddy, he's had a COVID to deal with as well. Obviously that's happened since he joined the club, so September 2019 as I mentioned. Is it harsh to say as well that he may not, in fact I'm going to say he definitely wasn't coached as well under Neil Lennon as he is now under Ange Postecoglou?
No, I don't think it is. I think I think we're all in agreement that was just quite a crazy year, not just for our two left backs, but for the full team. They were thrown under the bus very, very early in that season from their own manager. And I think also, going back to what Miff's saying, he wasn't brought in to be the left back starter. He was there to back up Bolingoli. Bolingoli was in better money. We had high hopes that we were going to see something from him, and then it kind of just didn't materialise. But we've only got rid of him in that summer there,
And we've got rid of him. He's not on loan.
I hope so.
I mean, you say COVID was a crazy time, but Bolingoli had a great time.
I did.
Time of his life.
Off to Spain.
Obviously, that was to try and look at other clubs.
Nothing else.
Nothing else. No, I just think that for what Taylor has had to come through, and I get where you're coming from in the Rangers fan side of things. I don't think that would affect him with his playing, but it would affect the judgment of him. 100% agree with you there. But I have to say that the way it's kind of worked out, he was the only left back last season, so he had the time. And my God, what a hard season to go in and do it, because it was a total rebuild, as we already know. And then we go and sign Bernabei, and we think, right, this is the challenge, this might be the level above that we need. And my God, he's just done, no, that's my jersey, here, come and get it,
Yeah.
And I think Bernabei's going to be really good for us. Obviously, we look at what happened on Saturday. It's a difficult place to go to, as you mentioned before we come on, Miff. I think that he will show a lot, but he, again, is just one of these people that are just going to be pupils of Ange Postecoglou and what he wants to do, and Greg Taylor is flying at the moment.
It also shows you with proper game time and proper exposure, that is the only way for young guys to improve themselves as players. You get so many kids that come through Celtic's academy, and up until now they've not quite been able to bridge the gap. For those who haven't seen it, but Paddy's just drank Miff's water there. That is against all COVID protocol.
What a dominating move, man.
I'll explain what happened there. My eyesight has covered my glass. Miff, I'm sorry.
I accept your apology.
That's like a prison move. Just come over and drink your drink.
I accept your apology.
I'll be taking his seat next.
I was making a point about something, but it's gone now.
I'm sorry.
No, what I was saying,
Playing games.
Game time and exposure to top level football is so important. And a lot of these young kids coming through Celtic's academy, they never quite make the leap from academy football, where they're the standout player, to being first teamers for Celtic. And you look at guys like Marcus Fraser and the various guys who end up at Ross Counties and St Mirren's and all these types of clubs.
I knew you were going to mention Ross County. Being your bunt every eye, they end up playing for Ross County. Actually, I seen that it was Falkirk Viala, and I think there was at the weekend there, and there was
a number of
5 or 6 ex-Celtic kids there, and you're like.
But then you see the biggest example away from that is the Andy Robertson, who couldn't feature at Celtic, didn't quite make it through. Then went to the lower levels, Queen's Park, Dundee United, Hull City, Liverpool, we know the route. And he just got exposed to first team football, and that's what made him a better player. He was able to play at Queen's Park without any real pressure. Dundee United, Hull, you don't have those pressures there. Mm-hmm. And these guys, or Andy Robertson as a specific example, was allowed to flourish.
Aaron Hickey, Liam Henderson as well, more recent examples where they've had to make the move. Ewan Henderson to a similar degree as well. So No, I think that, of course, we put pressure on the players, and I think in recent cases, like so Jack Henry, I know Jack Henry was bought in, but he was bought in young, and Mikey Johnson, the way the demands seem to have wilted them under pressure show that, you know, if there is an element of fragility in your character, it's going to get brutally exposed, especially at Celtic Park, probably more than anywhere else, because you can just feel that demand. I mean, I seen it last season when Johnson came on a sub. You've seen a few times his shoulders
Shrinking.
just slumped, and it's a shame because there is absolutely no doubt of the talent that's within Mikey Johnson, regardless what anyone thinks about how effective he's been. I don't think anyone can doubt. I mean, this guy was touted for, he was 16, 17 year olds playing in the Champions League, the B Champions League games, or the reserve Champions League games, is a really, really exciting talent, burst onto the scene, was really, really effective for Celtic at different times. But just as, Tino, the point you make, when you're just ready to make that leap and be like a permanent fixture in the team, there just seems to be that wee something that's missing to be able to make that leap. There's a difference between being the young guy that gets brought off the bench at times when you can produce a wee bit of magic, and then somebody that's relied upon every single week to be consistent and win Celtic games of football. And it's that difference that seems to catch just a lot of kids out.
So, like, obviously, football, if you've got talent, you've got talent, but it's the mentality side of it that obviously you need to kind of look at there then. So a good example I always think about, we're talking about the pressure of Celtic, and we're talking about, obviously, with it being a draw, it does feel like a defeat. You know, you're losing ground effectively in a two-way race most seasons. You look at someone, I think the only comparison, I'm not saying we're near the European levels of them, but Bayern Munich is pretty much a one-horse league in that sense, and they are very, very clever in bringing their youth players through, bedding them in, and you know, giving them long careers.
How do they tend to do it then, Paddy? What's the difference?
Well, this is what I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to get you, like, the opinion on this. Is it a mentality thing? Is it a culture thing? Do we put too much pressure on our younger players when they come through, especially Scottish players? Because there needs to be something there.
Well, just to turn that on its head slightly, most recent example is Anthony Ralston. So Ralston had been to St Johnstone in Dundee United. Either of them could have signed him. Didn't. You've actually came through the Celtic youth system. You've retained a place in the squad under Rodgers, who used them sparingly, but he used them a wee bit.
He had to.
When he had to.
Aye.
Ralston had a change in his own personal circumstances where I think it was the birth of his daughter that was the kind of trigger for him to say, right, I'm not playing at this. I need to get serious about it. Went away, got himself suitably fit. Is it maybe just that recognition that you still need to move it up another level to be a permanent fixture in the squad rather than just maintain the level that's got you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a line. So I done a really good interview with Greg Robertson from the Celtic Academy, and you can access that in the back catalogue of the podcast. And Greg says talent and ability will get you to Celtic's Academy. Your mindset and your approach is what will keep you there, because there's so many talented kids that come through our academy, hundreds if not thousands in recent years, but how many actually go on to make it? And you made the point, Paddy, you know, is there an issue with our homegrown talent? And it was a kind of follow-up question to the original. Do homegrown players get a harder time than, you know, maybe a big name signing? And there's examples of James Forrest, right? Now one of only 30 players to score over 100 goals for the club, has always split opinion and has always got a hard time. Maybe from folk in this room, maybe from someone speaking right now, maybe from the guy next to him. Callum McGregor, now the club captain, got a hard time at the start, and I've got to put the hands up here. I didn't rate him at first, got that one wrong. And there's other guys, Mikey Johnson you've mentioned, Stephen Welsh. I was at a game a few weeks ago, can't quite remember which one, at Celtic Park.
Motherwell.
Yeah, and he was getting grief before the pass was even getting to him at times. He was having a poor game by all accounts. But that doesn't mean in fact, quite the opposite. It means he should get our support. You should be willing your players on to improve. And actually, in that game, there was passes that were making their way across the back line to him, and you could feel and hear the tension and the atmosphere. If that was, I don't know, the latest foreign signing and not Stephen Welsh, does that happen?
I don't know. I would say this potentially the opposite. So if you take someone like, say, Bernabei, or hard to say Ralston now because he's more established, but say Ralston started last year and Bernabei said they were coming in at the same time, I probably really want Ralston to do well because it is your homegrown and it shows that you've done something right at the academy level. I mean, anyone pulling on a Celtic jersey, I want to do well, full stop. But I certainly wouldn't give the Scottish guy a harder time than the international guy. Definitely not.
Do you think, as a general though, and we can only speak for ourselves, and whenever profess to speak for other fans, but do you think just, from being at games and chatting to mates and different folks, after games and whatever, WhatsApp groups, do you feel the Scottish lads get it quite tight?
I do. I think I know where you're coming from on it. I think there's more of a risk for the club though, in the sense that, who we're going to play, the young player that we've brought through and we've not really had to spend any money on other than the wages that are on just now, or a £2.5-3 million player, that we need to hopefully settle in very quickly. If that was the argument you were kind of like bringing up for last season, I think it's a fine grey area, to be honest. A lot of the Scottish players sadly don't get the opportunity though. I find I kind of go back to, I think Dyla at one point probably had the most Scottish players I've seen play in a starting 11, and that was just down to circumstance. That was when we were really, really reining in our money, making sure that we weren't spending more than we needed to, because the challenge just wasn't there in the league. The league was taking care of itself. And since then, I think Rodgers almost had maybe about 5 or 6 on average, but that's starting to kind of go down again.
Mm-hmm.
What we really need to be looking at, and it's a big factor for me, is this mentality that I'm kind of going back to, is that we should be making sure the young players are at least getting a run in at certain points of the season. But when that's been happening, the worry has came from the stands. I look at Stephen Welsh. I think the worry for Stephen Welsh, sadly, is that I just don't know if he's going to hit the level needed. That's my personal opinion.
You're only saying that because he's Scottish.
Aye.
I know where you're coming from, but I just think that there's so many times, he looks just a little bit lost in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was games last season where, in the pre-season games, a handful of the young players that were coming in, and you were like, yep, looks okay. I was actually even quite surprised to see Owen Moffat leave. I thought there's maybe something there,
I think that's a general point on what's going on at Celtic and youth just now. There's obviously been some changes with McManus going and taking what he's learned in the first team into youth. I genuinely don't think we'll see a youth player break into the Celtic first team for about 2 years and establish and hold the ground, because I think Angie's going in and saying, what we've got, Owen Moffat, case in point, who you thought, maybe there's something there. He's saying it's not good enough.
Okay.
We need to kind of almost start from scratch here, because what we've got isn't producing and hasn't produced really for some time. Like talking about Dial and Rodgers and stuff. But in 2-3 years' time, you might see 3 or 4 coming in at a time, because they're going to be driving them on the same pathway, playing the same football in the same format that Ange plays.
I think you're going to see Rocco Vata coming through.
Maybe.
But maybe he's quite unique. Maybe rather than one a season, one every 2-3 seasons, we need to see more of that. And obviously there was a huge disappointment at losing Ben Doak, and I'm fed up reading how well he's doing, because it sticks in the throat that we lost him.
Well, he's the obvious one, but I think Vata's got a real chance.
Mm-hmm.
The reason being that I think he's got that wee bit of extra pace. That really, Doak would be similar to that as well. They've got that wee bit of extra pace. Doak really looks like he's kind of, he's get toned and slimmed down a wee bit. He was at Celtic, looks really, really fit.
He'd absolutely lever you.
I don't doubt that. But he is, you can see he's a talent. Seen a few of the goals that he scored playing for Liverpool, just looks excellent. But the point is, somebody like Welsh, a lot of people I know who go to the games with just say never a Celtic player, no good enough. They've made that conclusion on Welsh based on what they've seen to this point. Is there a huge body of evidence? I don't necessarily think so. I don't think he's necessarily that consistent around the team. I think we all came to the agreement at the start of the season that his fourth choice centre half, we were happy enough with that. If he was happy enough with that, but that then comes back to the question of mentality.
Yeah.
Are you then happy being the fourth choice?
Not happy, but I'm saying this is where I am now, and I'm going to drive like Ralston drove.
That's
into
what I mean. Is that what we're going to see from him? Is he going to have enough football for us to see that? That's all the questions that these throw up. Should he be first or second choice by now? Should we be expecting him to have shown that? What age is he?
Welsh, 22, 23.
So I would say yes, to be perfectly honest. Or is it then a loan move to go away and say, right, well, you'll need to really severely develop in the next 12 months.
I wouldn't have been
and then
upset
come
if he'd gone out on loan this season, and there was talk of it, and obviously there was a bid for him to, go to France, I think.
Udinese, I think.
Toulouse and Udinese was, I think, in January, and then Toulouse was the summer.
But I suppose just to bring it back to the original question, though, right? So the question is, certainly challenging us in this room, should we be giving players more time to succeed? And we've spoken about various examples there. And yeah, maybe when someone gets to 22, 23, it's like, is that all the player they're going to be? I mean, what is Greg Taylor? Is he around about the same age? 22, 23? Some guys develop at different times and in different ways and at different rates, and some guys get more exposure at the first team and some guys need to bide their time. So you've got to take all that into consideration. I mean, to look at the finer detail of Tony Ralston that we've spoken about, he's been at Celtic since he was 8 years of age. So the opposite of Greg Taylor's approach. He's been embedded in Celtic all his life. He made his debut over 6 years ago. So May 2016, that's a long time in football's bigger picture. And it was only last season that he became properly accepted and recognised as a player who could genuinely make an impact in the first team. I've got a further example, and I'm being a bit flippant about it, but Henrik Larsson, remember him, Miff? His very first action as a Celtic player, as I think we all know now, was to gift the ball to Chick Charnley at Easter Road in a league opener back in August 1997. Charnley sticks it in the back of the net, Hibs beat us 2-1, first league game under Wim Jansen. It all worked out in the end for Wim Jansen, for Celtic and for Henrik Larsson, as we all know. But no doubt there's people who'll have watched that game and left Easter Road going, don't fancy this guy much. And it is a flippant example, but we're very, very quick to make judgments on a lot of these guys.
But that's the hand in hand. I mean, a football supporter, I think we're allowed that. And I know where you're coming from. Obviously, Larsson managed to kind of redeem himself a bit after that, just a bit.
242 goals later.
No, I think that obviously it's just natural talking points that we have when it comes to football. The mentality I kind of that frustrates me, but then I catch myself doing it, is when you're in the stands and you're talking about Stephen Welsh. One of his last starts, I remember just being a bit like, this is I'm waiting on a mistake, and I'm waiting on just being too slow on the ball. And a lot of our midfield, a lot of our wing backs and wingers were getting just basically shut down very, very quickly because he just wasn't releasing it quick enough. Now, whether that's a case of I'm not good enough to go and do that, or it's a confidence thing, if I make this wrong pass, I'm going to have everyone down on top of me. We need players that are just willing to make the mistakes,
That's, and I think they've got the right manager to do so. Joe Hart being the most recent high-profile example when he made that big mistake in Leipzig, but then reverts and says, well, listen, the manager's asked me to do it and I will keep doing it.
Yeah.
And as long as they've got that, I don't know, safety net, if that's the right word, that the manager's saying, keep doing it, and keep getting it wrong because you'll get better. I mean, the last wee example on this one before we move on from this section is another example from the first team in the shape of Daisen Maeda. Lots of us, you and me again maybe, have already made our mind up on Daisen Maeda in terms of...
I haven't made my mind up. Don't be bringing me into your nonsense.
don't be dragging me into your nonsense.
And then the point of age is just turned 25.
Aye.
So you're talking about that developmental age. The other that we're discussing, he's moved to a new country.
It's because he seems like just a wise young man, doesn't he? With his straight expression and all that. But yeah, 25 years young, so just a kid really. And we also forget that he's less than a year into his move from Japan to the east end of Glasgow or wherever he's staying. It's a huge move. And again, the question is, maybe I'm just thinking about myself, but should we be providing more support for these guys?
Yes, but we feel that we're in a league, it's a bit of a pressure pot, 100%. And I just think that we're maybe all just a wee bit up to high dough after last season because we didn't know what was going to happen and we won it and we just want to keep it ours again. So I think as fans, it's a bit of a, right, let's keep doing this. But I totally agree with you, there just needs to be that wee, do you know what he might not score all the time, but what does he bring to the team? I was talking to the guys last week about even Liel Abada. They frustrate the life out of some. He doesn't. I love everything that he tries. I love everything that he's been doing lately. He's scoring. He's still scoring loads of goals. But still, some people will say, I don't think he's good enough. And I can get the argument. He doesn't beat a man, doesn't get a ball into the box. His crossing's not that good. At the end of the day, goals win you games, and he's scoring. You know?
Just jump online and look at his stats. But that's the thing. We don't just jump online and look at stats. No. We watch every minute of the 90 minutes these guys play, and you pick up on everything.
But again, Abada would be a good example of someone who is young. But I would say the vast majority of the support do give him time. But the reason for that is because he still scores
Aye.
assists.
Aye.
Regardless, I mean, his
No, you're right.
thinking back to the Motherwell game, he probably gave the ball away almost every time he had it, bar when he scored.
He scored 2 goals.
And he was involved in the other two.
Yeah.
But again, that's
Should have
someone.
with a hat trick, and didn't he really play well?
But-
And you're just like, I think that is what his quality is that he a bit like James Forrest, dare I say, he will just pop up with a goal and an assist.
This is me for Saturday with Moy, and there's a wee bit of, and we'll all be guilty of it over the years. Sometimes when a player gets in your mind as somebody you don't fancy, then you see everything they do wrong and nothing they do right.
Aye, it's a told you so game.
Aye, so Moy on Saturday, I thought he was slow, wasteful, and involved in all four goals.
I know,
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I know.
Slow, wasteful, and pivotal to the win.
Kind of just on the full topic, that's a player I have to say, like, I mean, a few weeks ago I was just like, it's another James McCarthy, why have we brought him in, give McCarthy a chance, or you know, what's the risk factor here? I have to say that he seems to be just slowly but surely just kind of getting up to match speed and really putting a stamp onto the games. Now, whether that's for Australia's benefit, I don't know. We'll see how he is after the World Cup, but I'm more than happy to take on for that just now.
I think we all stand to benefit from it, and
aye.
that's the way that'll go. But listen, it's an interesting debate, and it's a good one
definitely.
for us to start off with, and it could rumble on, and we could do a full show on it. But it's interesting just to hear the various kind of points that you lads make on the various players and where we're all at. And at the end of the day, Paddy, you're right. You want to be patient. You also want to win. It's your mentality as a Celtic fan. So, a debate that will rumble on.